This is your reality check.
Hi everyone, and welcome to The Reality Check, the weekly Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. This is the show for August 20th, 2018, and I'm your host, Darren McKee. With me, as usual, are Adam Gardner.
What's up, Cuboids?
Christina Roach.
Hey, checkers.
And producer Pat.
Hi, everyone.
We have a great show for you today. We're going to cover three interesting topics. I'm going to look at the prevalence of mosquitoes. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Adam's going to explore whether Amelia Earhart sent out distress signals that were heard around the world.
That's right.
But first, Christina, does cough medicine really work?
I know it's still technically summertime, guys, but after seeing all of the Halloween displays in local stores, it's a stark reminder that fall and winter are around the corner and the dreaded cold and flu season along with it. By the way, why we get more colds and flu in the winter may be a good topic for a future show, but I digress. Now, I thankfully don't get sick very often, but when I do, it seems whatever I get slammed with comes with a hella cough. I have to admit, I've never thought much about or questioned cough syrup's effectiveness. I didn't think cough medicine was a magical cure-all, but I assumed, considering the ingredients and claims, it likely helped mitigate an acute cough. And then I came across an article about the efficacy of over-the-counter cough syrups. But first, why do we cough? Now, simply put, a cough is our body's natural reflex to help clear airways of irritants and prevent infection. So when irritants find their way into your nose or your mouth, we're talking everyday stuff like dust or smoke or pollen or dander, receptors in our airways send signals to our brain, which in turn sends a message to our diaphragm. Believe it or not, a cough can reach speeds of 80 kilometers an hour or 50 miles per hour. And a Harvard Medical School article I read mentioned that a vigorous cough, the air can travel out at nearly the speed of sound.
Wow.
That's interesting. I'm trying to picture hearing that. I was like, is it break the sound barrier, your own cough?
It's like a sonic boom.
Maybe when the doctor asks you, you put that little oomph in.
So everyone listening has likely experienced a cough that was persistent or annoying enough, especially when you've been sick, that you'd try anything to make it go away. Now, cough meds have been around a long time. I link to a great video in our show notes that I cite quite a bit from the American Chemical Society on PBS's Reactions channel. Super clever name for a chemistry video series, by the way. They relay that old-timey cough syrup circa the 1800s contained morphine, cannabis, alcohol, chloroform, and even heroin.
Chloroform? Mm-hmm. Wow.
Now, the wiki for cough medicine also cites that heroin was originally marketed as a cough suppressant in 1898 because it was believed at the time to be a non-addictive alternative to the other opiate-containing cough syrups. Surprise! Heroin breaks down into morphine in your body. We just didn't quite know that back then. So fast forward to modern day, and the more common active ingredients found in cough syrup include dextromethorphan, or DXM, which is meant to block the cough reflex. DXM is referred to as an antitussive, which simply means medicine, drugs used to prevent or relieve a cough. Now, the downside with DXM, though, is it can make you very drowsy, so not exactly something you want to take if you have to drive or basically do anything that requires you to be awake and alert.
What's good if the cough is keeping you awake?
That's what the chloroform's for.
If you're taking it, if you're taking it at night to suppress your cough so you can have relief and sleep, it's a bit of a double whammy, right?
Right. Now, expectorants like guaifenesin are designed to help loosen and thin the mucus in your lungs so you can cough more easily. Decongestants like ephedrine open airways by narrowing blood vessels in your nose and lungs. And other common ingredients are antihistamines like loratadine, meant to reduce mucus production and swelling in the nose and throat. Okay, so what we really want to know is, does any of this stuff really, really work? Now, thankfully, there are a few systematic reviews, and we like systematic reviews. They analyze evidence from many different studies. And the verdict is, do I get a drum roll sound effect here, Producer Pat?
I can do that.
The verdict is there's very little evidence that cough syrup is effective at treating coughs. Now, when combing through carefully performed clinical trials, OTC cough medications are no better at suppressing or treating your acute cough than, you guessed it, a placebo. All of this research was inconclusive at best, guys. Several flat out said it just didn't work. One review from health research group Cochrane analyzed 29 studies covering nearly 5,000 people, and their conclusion was that no conclusion could be drawn for the effectiveness of OTC medications in acute cough. Another paper published in the journal BMJ, which looked at 2,000 patients over 15 clinical trials, found, quote, conflicting evidence in each category of OTC cough medicine other than the antihistamines, which they ultimately found to be no more effective than a placebo. Now, the good news is most coughs go away without treatment within a couple of weeks. And here's a quickie PSA. If it doesn't, you may want to see your doctor. Everything I read said that. I know it's little consolation to say your cough will eventually go away when you're hacking your lungs out, but there are some simple things you can actually do that may help speed things up. Namely, taking a steamy shower and drinking lots of fluids will help with decongestion. Cough drops can help stimulate the production of extra saliva, which can help ease a sore throat, but it's not because they're called cough drops. In truth, researchers say sucking on any hard candy will have the same effect.
Yeah, I often have a sore throat due to usually allergies or something like that, because my house is full of pets. And I'll take a lozenge to help me. And I've tried all kinds of different kinds, and they have these special things inside. And really, I found that I might as well just take a piece of candy. I feel like it has a very similar result. And sometimes I fall asleep with it in my mouth and I wake up and it's kind of gross.
For me, a normal piece of candy isn't quite the same as something, was it menthol? Something that's soothing, quote unquote soothing, cooling. Certainly the cough syrup, I find it works for the 5 seconds it goes down your throat and then not much after that. Yeah. But there are various lozenges that compared to candy, they are more effective, at least for me.
But it's funny, I think that a lot of people would just, you say, hey, you can just do this stuff, but it's just not acceptable, because it's just so easy drinking water and getting into a hot shower. But anyways, if you grew up like I did with a mom who followed you around the house when you were sick with lemon and honey in hand, guess what? The researchers at Cochrane did a review of several available studies comparing honey to over-the-counter cough suppressants as well as placebos or no treatment, and the authors concluded that honey probably relieves cough symptoms to a greater extent than placebo, than no treatment, and then the antihistamine diphenhydramine, and little or no difference when compared to dextromethorphan. Now, if it makes you guys feel any better, U.S. FDA pediatrician Amy M. Taylor reminds us that coughs are a normal symptom of a cold and can serve a purpose. She says, quote, coughs help the body clear the mucus out of the airway and protect the lungs, so you don't want to suppress all coughs.
And what else do coughs do?
They spread
the virus around. That's their purpose. That's the cough's purpose, to get itself to have more people coughing.
I'm actually kind of surprised, given the fact that cough suppressants have been around for so long and they don't necessarily carry the same sort of numbers that something like homeopathic remedies and whatnot carry in the pharmacy. It looks like real medicine, and so you think it's approved, and probably its efficacy has been proven. I find that really surprising.
I found it really surprising myself, because I always feel like a good dose of Buckley's helps me out when I'm quite sick.
Yeah, I mean, you pick it up and it's got a DIN on it, and it's kind of basic, but I picked something up in the pharmacy. If it's got NPN on it, I think it's probably junk. If it's got a DIN on it, I think it might work, but that's not a perfect system. Yeah.
And this is where I'm a bit, like Pat, I'm a bit surprised. I'm like, well, how could this be true somehow that we're not getting at it? Like maybe there's some sort of bimodal distribution that wants to average. It shows that things don't work out. But of course, if the conclusion was the opposite of what that was, and it was something I did agree with, then maybe I wouldn't have that criticism. Doesn't mean the criticism is incorrect and want to be thorough at all costs, but it just shows how the cognitive machinery kicks in.
And that's why it's wonderful when we have systematic reviews that look at a ton of studies to come to these conclusions.
I'm sure any one of these individual studies would have said it absolutely works, or this weird treatment absolutely works, but you got to take it as a whole.
From the world of a itchy throat to a itchy bug bite, what about mosquito prevalence? It's summertime in Canada once again, and that means mosquitoes. I'm trying to enjoy nature over here, and I keep getting bitten and buzzed. Cristina already looked at whether some mosquitoes like some people more than others in our episode of 497, so I just want to provide a little overview of what determines how many mosquitoes there are in the summer. At least in Canada, there's not that many in the winter for pretty obvious reasons. Mm-hmm. As you can imagine, just like many people, it is whether the mosquito couple feels they are comfortably established in their careers and want to start a family, or just have access to information about birth control. I kid, of course. What? Yes, more reproduction creates more mosquitoes, but what are the main variables at play? The two that I'll discuss today are temperature and rainfall, as each of these has a large effect on how long mosquitoes live and how much they reproduce. My main source is an article in The Conversation by Heath McMillan, Assistant Professor of Biology, Carleton University. Local shout-out. McMillan writes, quote, "Mosquitoes, like most insects, are cold-blooded, or ectothermic. Unlike us, their body temperature closely matches the temperature of the environment, air or water, around them. If it is cold outside, they are cold. If it is warm outside, they are warm. Any time spent outside of their comfort zone can slow or stop their development or even cause them to be injured and die. If a cold or warm front moves in, it causes mosquitoes to die." On the cold side, he linked one of his own papers with the title, "The Integrative Physiology of Insect Chill Tolerance," that was published in the Annual Review of Physiology in 2017, my favorite annual review.
Sounds like a band, Insect Chill Tolerance.
Now, I happen to be amused by this title because I read the word chill as that related to being relaxed. What's your chill tolerance? Make your own Netflix joke here.
Very high.
Quoting part of the abstract, "When insects are cooled sufficiently, they suffer from an initial loss of neuromuscular function, chill coma, that is caused by decreased membrane potential and reduced excitability of the neuromuscular system. For chill-susceptible insects, chronic or severe chilling causes a disruption of ion and water homeostasis across membranes and epithelia that exacerbate the initial effects of chilling on membrane potential and cellular function, and these perturbations are tightly associated with the development of chill injury and mortality." All that's saying is that on various physiological levels, coldness does not help mosquitoes' reproductive and homeostatic mechanisms, causing them suffering and death. What about temperature? Well, this is where I validate the idea that you often have to dig deeper. McMillan says in his piece, quote, "In order for most mosquito larvae to grow, temperatures need to be above a threshold, which varies depending on the species, but is typically around 7 to 16 degrees Celsius. The 7 to 16 degrees are both hyperlinked in the article, each to its own paper. If you click on the 16 degrees, you get a paper that says, quoting part of the abstract, "Development time from egg to adult was measured under laboratory conditions at constant temperatures between 10 and 40 degrees. Rate of development from one immature stage to the next increased at higher temperatures to a peak around 28 degrees Celsius and then declined. Adult development rate was greatest between 28 and 32 degrees, although adult emergence was highest between 22 and 26 degrees. No adults emerged below 18 degrees or above 34 degrees. Which doesn't really seem to match that 16 degrees part. And if you click on the 7 degrees, you get a paper that says, quoting part of the abstract, "According to a nonlinear model, the lower and upper thermal thresholds were respectively 8.4 degrees Celsius and 34.4 degrees Celsius for males, and 9.8 degrees Celsius and 34.2 degrees Celsius for females. Neither 7 nor 16 degrees are mentioned. This is odd. I couldn't access the full papers, but perhaps Macmillan referenced the temperature only for larvae as he stated. That said, why wouldn't the temperature all the way through to adulthood be the more relevant measure?"
Yeah.
So here you have an expert who definitely knows more than I do. Maybe he's using some sort of holistic knowledge he's gained from everything else and cycling it through. But if you hyperlink 7 and 16 degrees, you think if you click on that stuff, you'd obviously see the 7 to 16 versus different ranges.
Yep.
Regardless, there is a temperature window. The other thing that is needed is some wetness. I've long thought that the more damp it is, the worse the mosquitoes are.
Yeah.
With good reason. Quoting Wikipedia on the topic, "In most species, adult females lay their eggs in stagnant water. Yeah. Some lay eggs near the water's edge, others attach their eggs to aquatic plants. Each species selects the situation of the water into which it lays its eggs and does so according to its own ecological adaptations. Some are generalists and are not very fussy. Some breed in lakes, some in temporary puddles, some breed in marshes, some in salt marshes. Additionally, some breed on the water cupped on plants and the leaves or even hollow tree trunks. Some species will use any container of stagnant water, and the more of those that are available, the more there will be."
Yeah.
Given the importance of temperature and rainfall, you can understand why many species die off during northern winters, while this does not happen in warmer climates, such as in Africa, even though there are different species in different places. That said, there are some species that can freeze as larvae and then develop later. Cursed nature and their adaptations. While I hate them, I should remind listeners that of the thousands of species of mosquitoes, most of them don't interact with humans and won't bite you.
Oh, really?
But there is a bit of an overview about why there might be some more than others, depending on the season. And now, Adam. Amelia Earhart, did she send out distress signals that were heard around the world?
That's a good question, Darren. Amelia Earhart, who disappeared in 1937, is making headlines yet again, just like corduroy pillows. The latest group...
I haven't heard that before.
That was funny.
Delightful.
The latest group of articles popped up at the end of July and offer another piece of evidence pointing to the ever-popular theory that she was marooned on an island in the Pacific Ocean. This particular angle claims that distress signals sent days after she was said to have disappeared were heard around the world. The main claim is that a 15-year-old girl named Betty from St. Petersburg, Florida, heard a signal stating, and I quote, "Water's high, water's knee deep, let me out, and help us quick." A signal heard in Toronto, here in Canada, is said to say, quote, "We have taken in water, we can't hold on much longer." A study released by Tiger, the International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery, suggests that these signals could have been distress signals sent by Amelia Earhart and her co-pilot, Fred Noonan. So, just who are Tiger? It sounds like a somewhat generic name for a group that investigates all sorts of history regarding aircraft records.
Wasn't he also dating a Kardashian?
Practically speaking, it's a group which almost exclusively attempts to prove their theory that Amelia Earhart did not crash into the Pacific Ocean, as the historically accepted story suggests, but rather was marooned on Gardner Island, also known as Nikumaroro Island, where she lived to some later date.
Sorry, just a second. Gardner Island?
Gardner.
Is this really why you cover all these segments?
Well, it's just because I have a Googler for Gardner. It just keeps coming back up.
Isn't Nika Maroro a Pokemon character or something?
So you're going to cover traffic in Toronto?
Not from Gen 1 through 7.
Oh. Someone should fact check that. Please write in.
There's a new game coming out, but it's a remake of Yellow. This is the fourth time I talk about Amelia Earhart on the show, and 2 of those times this was in response to something Tiger had stated. My first Amelia Earhart coverage was from episode 196 back in June 2012. The claim at the time put forth by Tiger was that a jar found on Gardner Island was evidence that Amelia Earhart had lived there. The jar was claimed by the team to be freckle cream, but in reality it was simply a jar and didn't have any features unique to a brand of freckle cream that she used. So it could have contained many other things. Could have been freckle cream, could have been almost anything. In this episode, I also gave a general overview of many claims of what happened to Earhart. The next coverage I did was on episode 458 last year in July 2017. This evidence claimed that investigation of a photo proved that Amelia Earhart survived her crash. A Japanese blogger showed the photo predated Earhart's attempt to fly around the world by 2 years, and this particular claim was not made by Tiger, as it didn't mesh with their specific Gardner or Nikumaroro Island theory. Tiger's Richard Gillespie commented on not believing the photo. Finally, the last time I talked about Amelia Earhart was back in March of this year. Tiger claimed their analysis of bone samples recovered from Nikumaroro Island were Amelia Earhart's due to measurements estimated from photographic evidence. I didn't think it was all that strong, but there was some science going on there still. But enough of what was said before. What is this latest evidence all about? A lengthy paper by Rick Gillespie discusses the post-loss radio signals, those being signals received after Amelia Earhart was lost at sea. Tiger speaks of some 57 signals heard in frequencies Amelia Earhart would have been broadcasting in, that being 3,105 and 6,210 kilohertz. Now there is a total of 120 reported signals. Most of these only picked up the carrier wave, so they wouldn't be able to actually decipher any content from the signal. And the explanation for this could simply be that there were many people broadcasting on that frequency attempting to find Amelia Earhart and her co-pilot. Tiger's explanation to discount this is that only the Coast Guard cutter Itasca has permission to try to contact Earhart, but it seems plausible that others attempted to as well. Maybe they said, screw permission, we really need to find her, and a lot of people might have just been blasting at that frequency. The Coast Guard ship dismissed all post-loss signals and declared that all signals after 8:46 a.m. July 2nd were not sent by Earhart. Now, that's the official story. Tiger hypothesizes that these signals were sent from the Electra, Earhart's plane, while it was parked on the reef at Gardner Island. This means that the distress signal could only go out at low tide when the craft was not submerged. So they have this very specific idea of where they think the plane might have been, even though they never found it there. Based on this analysis, they believe that credible signals were sent when Gardner Island was at low tide. And looking at a graph in the paper, most of the early signals from July 2nd and 3rd are found within a 4-hour time frame, so it's really just during that single low tide. And since that period of time represents about a third of the time between tides, it's not all that remarkable a coincidence. One signal said to have come in, quote, as the tide was coming in, is actually when the tide was more than at average height. We then have a graph of July 3rd to 4th showing signals at all times of the tide, even some close to high tide, so it doesn't really mesh that well with the story. 2 signals received in North America actually appear very close to high tide. These include Dana Rudolph, a 16-year-old boy in Wyoming who claims to have heard Earhart say her ship was on a reef while the authorities all thought the plane was near Howland. At the same time, Miss Ernest Crabb, a woman from Toronto, heard an exchange between a man and a woman she believed to be Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan. She later heard, and I quote, muffled and indistinct dialogue between these people. So, these two really don't fit with the whole low tide, high tide idea at all, since it was an hour after high tide. But, you know, they're putting together a story, and I guess they don't expect people to pay too much attention to some of those specifics. And then there's Betty Clank from St. Petersburg, Florida, who doesn't know the date or time she heard what she did. She just had it in her notebook. Still, Tiger put it between 10:30 a.m. and 12:15 p.m. July 5th, which is smack in the middle of low tide. So obviously they're like, well, we don't really know what it is. It was probably here, in the place that really fits with our theory. On July 7th, Thelma Lovelace from St. John's, New Brunswick, apparently heard, "Can you read me? Can you read me? This is Amelia Earhart. This is Amelia Earhart. Please come in." And then there was a latitude and longitude stated. "We have taken in water. My navigator is badly hurt. Repeat, we are in need of medical care and must have help. We can't hold on much longer." She apparently lost the latitude and longitude that was stated in that broadcast. Too bad. But she said she looked it up and that she found an island where it was, but then she couldn't remember where that island was later. I know what some of you might be thinking. If Amelia Earhart had landed on an island in the Pacific Ocean, why are transmissions being heard on the east coast of North America, from Florida to Ontario to New Brunswick, assumed to be hers? If these signals couldn't be clearly understood by the people searching for her much closer, how could they get that far? The range of Amelia Earhart's transmitter was nothing close to allowing for this. Tiger explains that this was possible through a mix of harmonics and the ionosphere. So most of the details of this come from an older investigation by Tiger dating back to 2001. So this isn't really totally new, but they're kind of throwing it out in the news now like they like to do occasionally. The reason for which harmonics are necessary in this case is that Amelia Earhart's transmitter was only capable of broadcasting at 3105 kilohertz and double that 6210 kilohertz. This is far too long a wavelength, or rather too low a frequency, to allow for a signal which would bounce off of the ionosphere, the explanation used by Tiger for how the signal may have traveled so far. Only signals between 3 and 30 megahertz are reflected off of the ionosphere. Signals under 3 megahertz have a wavelength longer than the distance between the Earth and the ionosphere, so that doesn't work. Those over 30 megahertz usually penetrate the ionosphere and don't return to the Earth. So only in that small range, relatively small range, will they bounce off the ionosphere and back down to the Earth and potentially back up again. Harmonics are multiples of a transmitting frequency. Usually if you transmit at a certain frequency, there will be radio frequency interference at harmonic frequency. Mostly when people talk about harmonics in radio terms, they're looking to reduce or eliminate them. Usually harmonic frequencies in radio transmissions are considered weaker than the intended frequency, and these only get weaker with higher order harmonics, with the third and fifth being the strongest. Based on Tiger's analysis, which I don't have the technical knowledge to dismiss outright, the Electra's antenna emitted harmonics above 15,525 kilohertz, that being 15.5 megahertz, which were as strong as the original frequency. Tiger analyzed the radio which Betty Clank may have used in St. Petersburg, Florida, to argue that it could have been listening on that harmonic frequency. And they use things like, she doesn't remember what she was listening at, but she remembers it being about an inch from the side, which may have been around there. So some of that's a little hard to put together, but it's part of their analysis. So what's all this ionosphere stuff we're talking about? Well, basically, there's no way a signal could have gone directly from Gardner Island, which is somewhere in the Pacific Ocean between Hawaii and New Zealand, all the way to Florida. Line of sight just doesn't work. The Earth is curved. Some signals, as I mentioned in the 3 to 30 megahertz range, can bounce off of the Earth's ionosphere, allowing them to cross much greater distances. That's great. But how far can they really travel? Well, this depends on the angle at which the signal hits the ionosphere. If the signal goes close to straight up, it won't come back down very far from where it originally was. But if it travels close to parallel to the Earth, it could be reflected at a much further distance. The ionosphere is between 80 and 1,000 kilometers in altitude. Wikipedia describes that a single hop would allow a signal to travel up to 3,500 kilometers, with transatlantic distances requiring 2 or 3 hops. So what's a hop? Well, that's when a signal bounces off the ionosphere, then back down to the Earth, then bounces off the Earth, back up to the ionosphere, and then back down. So basically, every hop, it goes up and down once. The distance between Nikomaroro Island and St. Petersburg is over 10,000 kilometers, requiring at least 3 hops, depending on that perfect angle. A single reflection off of the ionosphere would, simply put, not get a signal that far. So could a distress signal sent from Amelia Earhart's plane actually send a harmonic signal on a frequency 5 times greater, which was strong enough to be received on an amateur radio that far away? Maybe. Now, I can't really speak to those specifics. I have a computer engineering degree. I took some electrical engineering courses. That was a long time ago, and it's hard for me to really wrap my head around how exactly an old radio transmitter might work and leech off this interference. Could that signal have unintentionally bounced off of the ionosphere more times than it would need in order to cross the Atlantic? This is physically possible, but it does seem very improbable to me. Could such a signal have been transmitted on different days to distances over various parts of North America, with 3 cities being over 10,000 kilometers away? It's starting to be a bit of a stretch here. And could these signals all have been received more clearly after 3 bounces off the ionosphere than the actual intended broadcast frequency would have been received by a thorough search effort in the area listening on the exact frequencies that plane was intending to be broadcasting on? Now that seems like even more of a stretch. Could these amateurs have misheard something, or perhaps even have been influenced by what was in the news at the time, a couple of days before when Amelia Earhart had disappeared? Now, there's actually evidence against the idea that she would have been on Gardner Island. 1 week after her disappearance, 3 search planes flew over Gardner Island. There was no distress call and no plane there. The idea put forth by Tiger suggests that the tides had swept it away in that week. The search also found no signs of survivors. It is a small island, only 2 kilometers by 6 kilometers. It would not have been hard to find 1 or 2 people trying to be spotted on that island, imagining they would try to be seen because they know that people are looking for them. There were signs of recent habitation, but this was likely due to the fact that a ship, the SS Norwich City, had washed up there in 1929, only 8 years earlier. 35 crew members, 24 of which survived, had camped on the island. One of them might have had a jar.
By the way, I've never heard of freckle cream. Maybe that was an old-timey way of...
Yeah, like, were freckles really considered so undesirable at the time that they had cream to make them disappear?
I'm going to have to look that one up. I'm interested now.
Now, the obvious answer, and one I've always put forth on the show, is that Amelia Earhart tragically perished in the Pacific Ocean while attempting a flight around the world. Tiger seems intent on finding evidence of their Gardner Island or Nikomaroro Island theory, and it seems like they're looking hard to find evidence that may not actually be there. They're doing hard work, and a lot of what they're doing seems like solid science, but ultimately, they're seeking to support an explanation for which there isn't much evidence for in the first place. This last bit of news suggests a fairly far-fetched perfect storm of quirks in radio, which would have a harmonic frequency bounce off of the ionosphere a number of times to reach amateurs in North America, tens of thousands of kilometers from the search party, which couldn't make out any of those same signals. I remain unconvinced.
Boom. Mm-hmm. Gardner Island.
I feel like at this point these Tiger guys are sitting around going, okay, what have you got, Johnson? And they're just trying to fit the narrative, and every time it's those meddling kids at TRC that just...
I don't know, it's keeping us both in business. Maybe there's another motive here.
Well, a lot of the time there's not actually much of a backlash. Like, I kind of, usually I try to look for articles where people are debunking it, and it kind of makes my job easier. For this particular one, it's been a month, and no one's really trying to rip it apart. Most of the coverage is pretty much like, oh, it looks like we found more evidence for where Amelia Earhart might have been. And if someone really looks it up, like, over 15 years, you've got like various news articles all coming out with different lines of evidence leading towards this one alternate explanation. And I would think that to a lot of people, they probably find that compelling. Maybe one of them isn't strong, but well, what if this? It's a bit and it's a bit and it's a bit. And this is how the conspiracy theories often come together. And it's not necessarily sort of intentionally deceptive. And I don't think that's really what's going on, because I think, these people really do believe that that's what's going on. They're searching really hard to find evidence that supports it. And if you search hard enough for something, you might find something that's not even there.
Believing is seeing. Well, thank you, Adam. And thanks for joining us once again, listeners. Cristina showed us that despite what many of us think and believe, cough suppressants don't seem to actually help your cough that much, if at all. I showed you that mosquitoes are more prevalent when it's wet and warm, but it can also be too warm, so that's an important thing to keep in mind. And Adam explored the world of Amelia Earhart once again, and it seems like the simplest explanation of her dying tragically in the ocean is the correct one without any distress signal heard around the world. And just before we go, I happen to be in Vienna by the time you hear this, so if you happen to be around and you want to say hi, send me a message. Darren@trcpodcast.com. Until next time, think better to act better.
Peace out, cuboids.
Stay classy, not smartassy.
We'll talk to you next week, everyone.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at TRC_podcast.
Love is a battlefield, Adam.
Sure.
Adam definitely did not get that Pat Benatar reference.
Sure.
I know songs.